Hello and welcome back to the Bird's Eye View podcast. We are here on the morning of Sunday, November 24th. I'm your host, Zach Worden, joined as always by Jori Negin-Shecter, and we are super excited to have back on the podcast Tyson Shushkewich, a writer at Jays Nation and Canadian Baseball Network. Tyson, welcome back to the pod.
Hey, thanks for having me.
All right, so today we're going to get into a little bit of Jays, a little bit of Canadian baseball talk, because it was a pretty exciting year for guys north of the border, a few standout seasons. Especially, for those Cleveland Guardians as they made it all the way to the ALCS, setting history for the most Canadian team in MLB postseason history. So super excited, but of course, so some pretty relevant Canadian Times Jays news with the non-tendering of Jordan Romano a couple of days ago. Tyson has a piece up right now at Jays Nation kind of breaking that down. But Tyson, what was kind of your first reaction to the news? I know it was kind of expected, but, I kind of still surprising to see it come down.
Well, I think what's interesting is that with Jordan Romano, you kind of haven't heard how things are really going with him, right? Like you knew he was on, like everyone knew the elbow surgery happened. Everyone knew that his 2024 season was really not like what everyone was expecting. And it's just unfortunate, right? And then you go into the offseason, it's like, oh, like, for he was due what potentially between 7-8 million in arbitration, right? Like contract wise. And I think when you boil it down, with the limited news, with kind of everything that was going on, the Jays and I think it was Rob Longley kind of mentioned it was like the Jays were hoping to see some sort of progression, like a level that they can go, yeah, we feel comfortable with either tendering a contract and all this, and obviously that didn't happen, right? And there's still some question marks out there of how he's doing. Is he rehabbing properly? Like, where is he at, kind of thing. And I think it was kind of one of those. It was one of those conversations of like it could happen, it could not happen. To have a Canadian player on the Blue Jays is always an exciting point to have. One of technically. One of the top 10, top 15 best relievers in the past few years on your team, and to have him go to free agency is a bit of a tough pill to swallow. But I think looking ahead, it's just, the elbow's not where they were thinking. The Blue Jays have to do a lot of overhauling this year, and they weren't comfortable with that number. And again, it's still early. You don't know what's going to happen if the Jays, do like a Chad Green option thing. They do something with incentives. They could always bring him back, but at the same time, Jordan Romano could go and get a $10 million offer from the Chicago White Sox, right? Like who knows? So it'll be interesting to see. But I think it was one of those like, oh man, it could happen, it could happen, it could happen, and then it did, and everyone's kind of like, oh, we get it, but it still sucks.
How surprised were you by the news, and where do you think things go next?
I wasn't terribly surprised. I had heard kind of the day before from some sources within that was kind of where they were leaning. And so when it was announced, it was kind of like, okay. I think the one that was more like I'm not too sure about was Swanson, only because he had struggled so much in 2024. Like, he had the delayed spring training with his son with the accident, right? And then he was on the injured list to start the year. He struggled, he went down and he came back, but he was more of the one who was like, I really don't know what's going to go on with him, right? And Tate, everyone kind of was like, yeah, he's probably going to go to free agency, right? So I think with Romano, it was, leading up to it, there was the possibility, and then it started to gain more traction. And that's again, it's just surrounding those question marks with his elbow, right? Like he just, without him coming out and saying, oh yeah, I threw a bullpen and it went well, right? Like it's not like the season where someone's at the ballpark and sees him doing long toss, right? Like no one's down, and like up until then, no one was down in Dunedin watching him throw bullpens or anything like that, or in the offseason where what he was doing. And so not surprised, only because just prior knowledge. But again, it's just one of those, once you actually see the headline, right, when Passan breaks it and you're like, oh, now it's reality, right? So as a fan, you're kind of like a little like heartbroken, because you just want almost every Canadian to play for the Blue Jays, because that's a feel good story. But at the same time, I think from someone who covers Canadian baseball, like Jordan Romano's climbing up the saves chart, right? And for him to accomplish those things in Blue Jays uniform was just like another like awesome little check mark beside that. But now that it potentially might not happen, given the future, if he can still close games, right? It's tough to see, but at the same time, it's a business, right? And the Blue Jays want to commit obviously those funds elsewhere, and considering they need a lot of heavy lifting this offseason in numerous areas, it was somewhere where they thought they could look to pursue elsewhere. So sucks, but that's kind of the way it goes.
It's a great segue to the overall scope of this offseason for the Blue Jays. Obviously, a very significant one for them and just kind of the way that they need to go about rebuilding their bullpen. Probably, of course, if the reports have them connected to help in the rotation, and then of course, they need to add a little bit of power to the lineup. But what is kind of your overall assessment of this offseason, and who are some guys that you're looking at that you think maybe not named Juan Soto that would be a good fit for the Blue Jays?
Yeah, I think it's interesting, right? Because the Blue Jays, we've kind of heard the stories too. Like the Blue Jays have their salary division, right? It's like if we get Juan Soto, we're gonna go this way, right? And if we don't get Juan Soto, we're gonna go this way, right? And they have funds to play with, like even with, let's say they don't sign Guerrero Jr., right? Like Guerrero Jr., they still have penciled in for approximately like 30 million, right? Like that's what he's gonna get in arbitration. So that money's already like committed regardless of the long term. But Bichette's money is committed because of the money he's got. So they have funds to play with, right? But the issue is that the Jay like if we go back to the bullpen, the Blue Jays have never committed significant money to the bullpen since like the BJ Ryan days, and that was a volatile deal, right? He started off strong, he ended off struggling, like, and that's the reliever market. The reliever market is so ebb and flow. We've seen guys who historically have done well, like Craig Kimbrell was one of the most dominant relievers in the game, and now that he's in this more twilight of his career, like he's not that guy anymore. And I think with the Blue Jays, it would be a real turn of events to see them go and sign like Tanner Scott, right? Like Tanner Scott's arguably the biggest name in the market. He's going to command a crap ton of money, and there's he could be a signing, and in 4 years, it's one of the best deals in the league because he's doing better numbers than Josh Hader and all these other guys, right? Or could be he blows his arm out, and that's just the way it goes, and that's the risk with any type of deal when you commit funds like that. But historically, the Blue Jays, I think, especially with the Jordan Romano, Don Tender, like you're gonna see them. I think they got a guy in Chad Green who I think they have some confidence in. If Eric Swanson can come back and be the guy he is, he's a good guy in the setup. And then I think you're going to see them kind of pivot towards players like relief pitchers, especially where they sit in that like $4 to $6 million average, like a Jimmy Garcia kind of thing, where they have the experience, they have the veteran, historical stats to back them up. They're not guys that are going to blow you away. They're not going to be, the Jeff Hoffman, the Carlos Estevez, those guys up here, but they're going to be those middle of the road 3 to 4 ERA guys who will help you in the season, and then they're going to lean on some, the Ryan Burrs, the Brendan Littles, like they're going to lean on those a little bit, but they need a little bit of quantity and a lot and quality at the same time. So to commit such funds to that is a tough call, right? And I think for the bullpen, right, like that's where that is. And then when you look at other areas of the roster, like this team kind of needs like a fourth outfielder, arguably a third baseman. If Alex Bregman's in the cards, if Scott Boras is going to come down from that 300 million evaluation, that's kind of crazy a little bit. But he's got he's got Manny Machado numbers. He's up there, but he's not the same guy that had his MVP seasons in the day, right? Like he's an option if those numbers come in. You're going to probably, Anthony Santander is a guy that you could probably commit some funds to. I think Blue Jays fans will go ecstatic if Teoscar Hernandez comes back, especially since he proved he can still play some defense in the corners. And they need a power guy, right? Whether that's Tyler O'Neill, who doesn't have the qualifying offer, so that's an intriguing option. Canadian too, right? That's always good. And so I think there's a few different names like that you can kind of pencil in, and then I think the Blue Jays this season are going to go in with second base being like, hey, bunch of infield prospects. Second base is up for grabs. Who wants it? Right. And then third base, you can address through Bregman's kind of the guy if you want a third baseman, if they want to put Addison Barger there, and hopefully his glove kind of finds a way to figure it out there. So there's different options. Power bat is going to be the guy, right? Like that's going to be the calling card. It's whether it's O'Neill or someone like Santander who's got a little bit of experience. Same with O'Neill in the Rogers Center. So there's a few different names out there. They could even trade for someone like Helsley, right? They got the middle infield depth to do it. And it's the Blue Jays, right? They kick tires on so many guys in the offseason. So I could throw out 20 names and you'll probably see an article on each one of them in the winter being like, they were interested in, they met with him. But Juan Soto's the chase, right? Juan Soto's the guy. And, they could pivot and go get Freed or, Burns or someone like that or Snell. But I think once Juan Soto signs, it's going to be that trickle down, right?
Yes, very much anticipating for that to happen because it has been so quiet. I think I saw a tweet where it was like, at this point last year we had Aaron Nola and Reynaldo Lopez or whatever, but really just the Angels doing stuff right now. So I wanted to get your opinion on, kind of that middle infield group of, the Will Wagners, the Addison Bargers, Relvis Martinez, Spencer Horwitz. Who of those guys are you most confident in kind of being, not only able to handle like a full major league season, but being able to like succeed and possibly step up and kind of be the guy to be able to run away with that job?
Yeah, interesting question because I think the pros and cons with each player are just kind of, evident of like, okay, Spencer Horwitz, right? If we put Spencer Horwitz at second base, we know his bat is going to, middle of the road or higher, right? Like he's going to be that guy who we saw the power from him this season. That was a really impressive, but he's one of the lower guys in terms of fielding value and base running, right? Like he's not the guy that you would expect to be the best infielding second baseman. And if the Blue Jays are okay with that, which historically they've not, they've always, as of late, they've been glove first kind of people. That's why Dalton Varsho's in the organization kind of thing, right? And they hoped the power would come, and it did to an extent, right? But I digress there. But anyways, Spencer Horwitz has the bat and not the defense. Leo Jimenez has the defense and not so much the bat, even though he had an impressive season in AAA, right? And I think the wild card in all of this is Wagner, right? Because he was not a throw-in in the Kikuchi deal, but when you looked at that deal, it was like, oh, we got Jake Bloss, cool. Oh, we got Loperfido, cool. And it's like, oh, we also got Will Wagner, awesome. And then you look at his stats, and he's like, oh, wow, he's doing really great in AAA. Who knows? That might translate over. And then he got that cup of coffee to end the season. He had the, ended on the aisle with the knee thing. And I think when you look at this team moving forward, I think it's gonna be that platoon, right? Like I think you're gonna have I think the Blue Jays are gonna move David Schneider away from second base. We saw that towards the end of the season, especially with after Kiermaier was dealt. He was in left field pretty much the rest of the way. I think they've kind of settled on that as like a fourth outfielder type. But even he, I would say, is not, guaranteed a position heading into spring training. I think you're gonna see a battle for those spots right now that, Luis Dos Santos, he's no longer with the organization, right? And I think you got, or Elvis Martinez historically never really been much of a second baseman. He's, I think, a guy if you're going to have internally go for third base or, you know, maybe try and figure it out at shortstop. He's a bit more on the outside because of the, the suspension and the late return to the year. He's in winter league ball right now. But I think if you're going to put him, unless he has like unless his bat absolutely demolishes in spring training, I think he's kind of a guy that you're like, okay, we're Matt, you're going to AAA, right? And if you got to prove your way back up here after tanking your value, I think at second base you're basically shut them all down and go, it's open. We may go with the platoon. However, Will Wagner proves that he can play it every day. If Spencer Horwitz proves that his glove can play there every day, there's an option where one of these guys starts with it. However, once opening day starts, there's no guarantee that that position's yours the rest of the year. If Will Wagner ends up going to AAA, if Horwitz ends up going to AAA, something like that, right? Like there's opportunity where these guys are coming back, and then Ernie Clement can play there too. Historically, not so much. He's more on the third base side. He's probably going to get a run there again, depending on how free agency goes. But I think out of that group, right? Like you got a couple of guys that are gonna be a little higher on the charts, but when spring training rolls around and opening day comes around, it's fair game. It's absolutely fair game, and I think that's the proper way to do it. If that's the decision going into the new year.
I wonder if the way to solve that glut would be looking at selling high on some of these guys. I mean, Ryan Helsley seems like an obvious name that you already mentioned. I've been banging the Devin Williams drum, something around Spencer Horwitz, but that to me also seems like an option if they were to kind of solve because they've got about a million guys that could play second base.
Yeah, and fun tidbit back a few years ago when the lockout was happening, the Blue Jays almost had a deal in place for Devin Williams, a straight up 1-for-1 trade. I won't say who the other player was, but that almost happened, and then Jose Ramirez interest came around and it died. So that was they were interested in him before. It'll be interesting to see if they go back to him again. But I think yeah, you definitely can. You can sell high on these guys because again, you got someone like Barger, you got Martinez, you got Jimenez, you got a couple guys here who are flirting with that we don't belong in AAA anymore, but we also, people say the quadruple A, right? Like they need a shot to play every day, and the Blue Jays, if anything, where they have the most depth right now, it was the same few years ago. They had the most depth at catcher, so they utilized that, right? Now they have a ton of depth at the middle infield, and we saw them move players around last year. We saw them, Santiago Espinal was gone in spring training, start of the year. They moved on from the other guy too, Otto Lopez, right? And Otto Lopez had a really good year, right? Like or a solid year down once he went to Miami, right? So I think you can, one or two guys, right? But the problem always will be the risk associated with it. Like if you trade Addison Barger and and you give him some time to figure it out in the major leagues like he did last year, like that guy could be a 20 plus easy home run bat. But he's, past 2 seasons, we haven't seen that. It's just, there's always going to be that risk, right? And that's the name of the game when it comes to trades like that. And the benefit the Blue Jays have is they have players who can be a bit expendable when it comes to that because you can't play them all, right? Like you can't play them all. You're not going to fill your bench with all those guys because then it kind of stunts them in terms of like development, right? Like you want them to play every day, whether that's in the big leagues or AAA. And you got a pretty good utility guy in Ernie Clement across the diamond if you sign some free agents. And on top of that, the Blue Jays need to do some heavy lifting this offseason. They need to sign some guys who have power, have experience, and that's again going to limit or trade for, right? Like that's going to limit those guys' opportunities in the field. That's the name of the game, and you can definitely utilize that talent elsewhere. Mind you, Blue Jays fans, usually put their prospects on a higher echelon. The farm system is not as potent as it used to be. However, that being said, there's definitely got, those guys got calls, they got interest on Martinez over the years. The PED thing really tanked his value as of late, but Barger's a name that could get interest. I don't think he's going to get the most return that we would see, right? Same with guys like Horowitz and whatnot, and I don't think they're going to trade Wagner after just acquiring him. You never know, but at the end of the day, they have some value. We tend to put a lot of praise on them that other teams don't value as much. There's a reason, like I said, like a few years of Jordan Groshans was one of our number one guys, and we got our two kind of relief pitchers for him. So it's one of those things of, yeah, you can use it, but will it be enough?
It's going to be fun to see. It's going to be interesting. I think that there's going to be probably just, so many moves compared to the last couple off seasons where it was, they only had a handful of moves to make. And this year they've got so many to make. So it's going to be kind of fun to watch. All right, let's move on. Let's move on to some Canadian baseball talk. I did want to get your Cade Smith thoughts. Tyson got a piece up over at Canadian Baseball Network titled Guardians reliever Cade Smith deserved more attention. And, it's hard to disagree. Cade Smith, he ends up getting a vote for AL Cy Young, and he ends up finishing, I believe it was fifth in the AL Rookie of the Year voting. I'll let you have the floor, Tyson. I know this is something that you're pretty passionate about here.
I will die on that hill that Cade Smith deserved more recognition. I think, yeah, the guy forced himself to be on the opening day roster. He came into spring training, did well. He had a really great, season last year. Like this guy just made the Guardians go, you need to keep me here. And right from the get-go, they put the ball in his hand and he finished the year with 70 plus appearances, a sub 2 ERA. He led the league in relievers in F4 and fielding independent pitching. The things he could control the most, he did. And he finished fifth behind Mason Miller, who only beat him in two categories. One of them was strikeouts, which he had one more, and saves, which because he was the Oakland Athletics closer, and the Guardians have Clase, who, again, Cade Smith, in terms of replacement value over replacement pitchers, beat Clase, who is nominated for a Cy Young. But again, at the end of the day, where Cade Smith didn't get recognition was the stats that really stand out in terms of like fun and excitement, right? Saves. He was not going to be saving much. He had one, right? Because Clase is the guy you turn to. Strikeouts. He wasn't in the top 5, but he was up there. He was like top 15, top 10 or something. I can't remember off the top of my head. He had 103 of them, right? His fastball was in like the 100th percentile in value, right? This guy got called on by the Guardians every time they needed help. When stuff hit the fan, Cade Smith got the call to come clean it up, and he did an excellent job on it. 20 plus holds, amazing stats with runners on base. And even before, like after the votes were casted and Smith went into the playoffs, like obviously the rookie of the year voting doesn't take into account those things, but he broke records. He broke a Guardians record for appearing in every single game in the ALDS because they went to 5 games. He appeared in every one of them. He broke an MLB record for relief pitchers for the division series across both leagues with 12 strikeouts. He had the most out of any relievers, right? This guy in his first year did many incredible things, and it's an absolute shame that he didn't finish in the top 3. Now, don't get me wrong. Gil and Cowser were impressive as well. I have my thoughts on Gil because he's had experience before. But those two were very impressive. Could Smith win it? He maybe, who knows, right? But he got a little screwed over because he didn't have some of the more exciting categories. And if you look at the tallies, right? Because another knock too is he pitched in the AL Central, right? AL Central's not a powerhouse, right? But you still got to get the guys out. And he came in the situations that were terrible, and he got the job done. The postseason, he handled the Detroit Tigers. He got hit around with the Yankees. The guy pitched 70 plus times this year and is running out of gas in his rookie campaign. And again, he's the guy they're turning to. And when you look at the end tallies, there was one guy who gave Cade Smith a first place vote, and that was Evan Woodbury out of Detroit. And it's a guy who sees him constantly, and that's who gave him the vote. And it's like, and it sucks, right? Because the guy just came out of nowhere. He was gaining traction across the league. And he will tell you humbly, like he doesn't do it for the hardware or anything like that. But that guy deserved more credit. Austin Wells, for example, finished with like a 3.2 war above replacement or whatever, the F4 or whatever. He played a bunch more games. He played catcher, etc. Cade Smith led all relievers in that category this year and finished like point 0.5 behind him. Like, you're killing me here. So I will die on that hill that he deserved more recognition. And I think Guardians fans would agree with me.
Tyson, I'd like you to walk with me. I'd like you to do a little bit of dreaming with me. I'm thinking of the 2026 World Baseball Classic. I'm thinking of that bullpen and Cade Smith locking down saves at the end of it. The Team Canada doing wonderful things. Are we thinking like an Eric Gagne level of success here? Like, could he become is the capacity there for him to become the greatest Canadian reliever ever?
I mean, that's a tough comment, mostly because Eric Gagne, to win the Cy Young and do what he did and have the save record for most consecutive without breaking one, that's a tough one. Like that is up there. But I think the most important thing this season is to see how Smith bounces back, right? Like it's the same thing whenever you see a rookie player excel. Like let's say Paul Skeens, right? Like Paul Skeens, incredible pitcher, right? He and Jackson Merrill both, you could argue each way, should have won the Rookie of the Year award, right? But the biggest thing is to see how they bounce back after a year when, the spotlight's on them. Teams are adjusting to them. It's you see players, all the time have those peaks. Davis Schneider, right? He had those peaks. He was absolutely mashing the ball. And then teams went, oh, he's really struggling on high fastballs. So they start throwing them high fastballs. And you saw that valley, right? Like I think when it comes to someone like Cade Smith, he's got the benefit that he is a bullpen pitcher, so you don't see him as much. But after spending a whole season in the big leagues, like there's dedicated analytics teams that go and find and go, hey, in the seventh inning, when Cade Smith is down in the count, he goes to the fastball in, right? And those are things that you just have to pivot on. And I think, you know, there's a lot of really impressive Canadian relievers, right? Like Matt Brash didn't pitch this year. He was phenomenal with the Mariners, right? Like that guy, I mean, if I had to make a vote for who closes out games for Team Canada at the World Baseball Classic, I turn to Matt Brash every time because his slider is just phenomenal. It's phenomenal, right? And Cade Smith would be the guy that I'd put in front of him. And there's quite a few other guys that I'd have up there too, right? I think it's just when you look ahead, the biggest thing is just how you're going to bounce back, especially such relief pitching is so volatile, right? Like I kind of alluded to earlier, BJ Ryan the Blue Jays gave him so much money. He was so good. And then he went, woof, right? Like he got hurt and went, like it's just, and that's why the Blue Jays let Jordan Romano walk, right? And it's just so volatile, right? So the biggest thing for Smith and someone like Eric Zabrowski, right? Like on the Guardians too, it's just how do you go into the next year, make the changes when the other teams are making changes to you? And if he can accomplish that, the Guardians I think, are set with him. Like he's going to be that guy that's going to be, is going to continue his role. I come in and clean up the mess that you left me.
There's an interesting conversation to be had around Cade Smith, I think, coming up because, of course, Canadian Baseball Hall of Fame's Tip O'Neill Award will be handed out here shortly. And,
Yep.
It's a tough conversation because Cade Smith was so excellent. But of course, there is a past winner who also had a pretty good year for the Toronto Blue Jays playing first base. And I want to get your thoughts. I mean, is there a world where Cade Smith wins the Tip O'Neill over Vladimir Guerrero Jr.?
Probably not. Only because Guerrero Jr. just had such a phenomenal end to his season. I mean, it's tough, right? Because even let's say Guerrero Jr. didn't have the season he had, like Josh Naylor still had a pretty good season too, right? Like it would be tough. It would be tough to beat out those two guys. I definitely think he's in the top three. Like I definitely think he's up. Like I think the three guys that we just like mentioned here, like those are your guys, right? Like those are the votes that are gonna. Those are the ones that the board or whatever's gonna decide on. I just don't see how Guerrero Jr. loses it after the second half of the campaign he had. And it's not a knock on Smith. It's not a knock on Naylor. They both did phenomenal for their clubs. It's just how do you not vote for that guy, right? Like Canadian aspect aside, right? Like because it's the Canadian baseball players who have excellence on their own and for the team, but Cade Smith, the problem with is Cade Smith and Josh Naylor, like both were important to their team. Guerrero Jr. was the guy for the Blue Jays, right? Like the guy. He was, especially after Bichette struggled. Like I just don't see how he loses it.
So safe to say your vote, so to speak, would go to Vladdy Guerrero Jr., I guess.
If I had one, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it'll be interesting, and I mean, as well, like Tyler O'Neill led the Red Sox in home runs. Like it was a pretty good year.
Yeah.
There's a lot of guys kind of that are in the mix, and I think you look back at last year, and I think like maybe Naylor was so good at last year as well, like probably even better than he was this year. That it would be tough for Smith to have won last year, but just a really solid year. So let's kind of keep moving on. I kind of want to stick with the Guardians. Of course, as we mentioned, the four Canadians there. But the Naylor brothers, Eric Sabrowski, like you mentioned, what was it kind of like for you, like being able to watch like all these Canadians in the postseason and seeing, Smith and Sabrowski come into to all these games and pitching a ton. And then of course, Josh Naylor, both the Naylors, I guess, did have their struggles in the postseason, but both, I think overall in the scope of the 2024 season had pretty successful years in Cleveland.
Yeah, because this year Naylor really got the run to be the go-to guy behind the plate, right? Like, and for Bo, especially like Bo, right? And I think with him, it was like, okay, catcher's such a tough position, and with a young guy coming up, usually Danny Jansen had like guys to lean on, right? Like when he was coming up, and Naylor kind of had that a little bit in Cleveland, but with him, it was like, hey, yes, you can play defense, right? But your back kind of needs to play up a little bit, and we saw at times really him peak and valley, and he was really putting the ball in play and found a little bit of power this year, which was great, and I think. Just overall, like the Guardians are the one team that have really put a lot of faith in Canadians when it comes to drafting and signing players, right? Like they picked up Naylor from what was it, the Padres there, I think, yeah, and they traded. They brought them in. They've drafted multiple guys throughout the year. Jacob Zybin was a guy they took on, right? Like it's just they've invested a lot of you know resources into Canadian players, and they're seeing that talent come up, right? Like Sabrowski, he's the guy that you would make like a Hallmark movie on because he's just had so many injuries. He came back and just absolutely shoved. He same thing, right? Throughout the year, he made it like you need to bring me up because I'm demolishing people down here. He came up and he was kind of a dark horse, right? Like he was the guy that the Guardians turned to at really important times in the playoffs, right? And there was mixed results, right? Like there wasn't there was highs and lows, but the guy kind of came out of nowhere and just said, when I'm healthy, this is what I can do. And the Guardians went, we're going to exploit that to the max, right? And finished the season strong. I know he had some, not records, but he definitely had some stretches where he was just, same thing, just absolutely shoving. And the Guardians turned to him in the playoffs to get some stuff done, to do some cleanup. And again, mixed results, but positivity, with him performing the way he is, the Naylor brothers doing what they're doing, right? And just having Smith do what he did this season. Like the Guardians, yeah, like you mentioned, the four Canadians being that postseason record, right? That's impressive, and it just goes to show that Canadian baseball players are getting the recognition. They're getting the opportunities, right? Like right now, there's over 1,000. plus Canadians that are playing baseball south of the border or for an affiliated team like UBC, right? Like they're starting to get recognition. We see 10 plus Canadians get drafted or signed every year in the summer, and these teams are just starting I think this is just really the tip of the iceberg, and the Guardians are just ahead of the game.
Yeah. Yeah, really exciting to see them, and how they did in the postseason. Let's move on to another team that had, I guess a couple of Canadians in the Boston Red Sox, and, Tyler O'Neill and Nick Pivetta, of course. I think O'Neill is kind of the headliner there going to Boston having such a good year, and I know he's a free agent now. What are your thoughts on his free agency and kind of what would be best for him and the next step of his career after having, kind of this bounce back season that saw him kind of return to the form of himself where he, the one that almost like got some MVP votes in St. Louis.
Hmm. Yeah, right. Like when you look at Tyler O'Neill, it's just he's had that one season, I think it was 2021, where he was just absolutely like you said, just top of the class. He was that go-to guy. And over the years, the Cardinals had a stacked outfield, right? Like they had so many guys that they could turn to, and he was, trying to establish himself, but he just couldn't stay off the injured list. Like his injured list history is all over the place. I think it's like 11 to 14 instances over the past few years, which is not good, right? Like that's tough to sell to teams to be like, I can be the guy, and then after getting traded to the Red Sox and playing in an AL East division that can, really be troublesome at times. Like he found a way to lead that team in home runs. Like he was just demolishing the ball. He arguably had a better year injury history wise. He had like one freak injury with the leg infection, which is like, what the hell do you do? You can't stretch that out, right? Like you can't, like there's things you can do, I guess, but really like how do you avoid that one? So I think with him, it's just what's mostly benefiting him is he's not attached to a qualifying offer, right? Because you got guys like Santander, you got guys like Hernandez, and then next up is O'Neill, and he doesn't have that qualifying offer, right? And I think for any team looking for a power bat from the right side who's got that experience in left field, he's the guy that you can turn to. You just got to know that there's an asterisk there, right? Like, so I think when you look at him, you're definitely doing a short-term deal, and I just incentivize the crap out of it, right? And almost like a with Garcia with the Blue Jays, right? Like vesting option. If you play this many games, boom, next thing. Or options, right? Like player options and stuff. We've seen that really been used. Something like like what Cody Bellinger did. I think you're looking at like I said, a short-term deal, 2 to 3 years, options galore, incentives galore. But he's the guy that when he's healthy can show that he's got the power and the ability to play left field with the arm that he has and be a contributing factor to that team. I wouldn't be surprised if he returns to Boston, to be honest with you. It's just a fit that worked, and why break something that isn't broken, right? Especially since when you look at someone like Pivetta, he's got the qualifying offer attached to him. He rejected it. I think a lot of people were a little shocked by that, but he's banking on a multi-year deal, and even people like Passan are saying he's the guy that's going to get a lot of attention this year. So it'll be interesting to see.
Do you see any universe that the Blue Jays maybe sniff around on him? I know you wrote a little something about kind of the potential link for him in your piece about three outfielders not named Juan Soto. And I mean, I had him as a guy that I wouldn't mind the Blue Jays kind of taking a swing at. They need power in the corner outfield spots, and he would bring that. Obviously, the Canadian angle goes without saying. Do you see the Blue Jays sniffing around on Tyler O'Neill?
Yeah, definitely. I think because they are fortunate because they have other options that are available if needed, right? Like if the Blue Jays didn't trade for Loper Fido and Clase, I'd put more caution to the wind because O'Neill, like I said, he's got that injury history that just is like, you're playing on the turf. You got guys like Kevin Kiermaier who like said, like, I prefer playing on grass, but they can make the turf as good as they can, but there's still the risk there. And people have said in the past, like that's contributed to them not playing well or getting hurt. But even Kevin Kiermaier, like we saw him hit the IL, I think a couple times. One of them was because he ran into that fence in Boston, and the other one was a hip thing, right? Like, which I don't even think happened in Toronto, if I remember correctly. So there's pros and cons, right? And I think the Blue Jays set themselves up for success with those Loperfido and Clase A deals where you can take the risk that O'Neill can play because they need a left fielder. Like Davis Schneider is, I like Davis Schneider, but he's the peaks and valleys just leave you wanting a little more when it comes to consistency. And having him and O'Neal be potentially those options, having Loperfido be the guy, because even he too, right? Like the strikeouts were a little top heavy. He struggled a little bit to adjust when he was becoming like an everyday player, and he started to figure it out. And the issue with that is that the Blue Jays, if they really want to contend, you don't have the option to be like, okay, you have 2 months to figure it out, right? Like it's like, no, if you give a guy 2 months to figure it out, you're in the bottom of the AL East and 10 games behind the Yankees, right? So Tyler O'Neill, if he can do what he did, right? Like it's just the question marks, right? Like, do you take a flyer on him? Absolutely. Do you take a flyer on him at this value? Maybe not. Do you do it at this value? Sure, right? But the issue is that depending on where they stand with Juan Soto, that determines everything, right? Like, because if you sign him, then no, obviously, like that's just not going to happen. But it just depends what happens there, and then the chips fall where they are, right? Like then you pivot. But at least with the Blue Jays, it kind of different than last year, right? With Shohei Ohtani, you don't pivot after Shohei Ohtani. There's no one to pivot to. With the Blue Jays, at least in this instance, yeah, Juan Soto was an absolute generational player, he's top tier, but you can pivot, right? You can pivot to Teoscar Hernandez. You can pivot to Anthony Santander. You can pivot to Tyler O'Neill. And for someone who's not attached to a qualifying offer, who's Canadian, so that connection's there, like you mentioned, and someone who his calling card is his power when he's healthy, that checks a lot of boxes that are there, and the Blue Jays are set up in case the injuries rear their ugly head.
He's just one of a bunch of Canadians who are of course free agents this offseason, and I don't think we I don't think we want to get to all of them. But out of the remaining guys, the Michael Sorokas, the Cal Quantrells now,
Mhm.
um, Charles LeBlanc is a free agent. Who is kind of the most intriguing out of that group that's not Tyler O'Neill that intrigues you the most?
I got two of them, and the first one's Soroka, only because I think if you want to add someone who has the ability to start games, but can also be a bullpen piece who can log innings, he's a guy you can turn to, right? Like he had that injury history. That guy's the same thing, right? Like he had three surgeries on his Achilles. Guy's walking off the mound, tears it, right? Like he's walking. The other instance, he was walking on the field and he did it again. Like the guy struggled, right? And then he got an opportunity to do it in Chicago, and again, out of the gate, he didn't have the best stats. He hit the injured list again with the shoulder thing, but he improved a little bit at times, that when he's in the bullpen, he's healthy. And the problem is when you look at him, when you look at his stats, you see 0 and 10, and you're like, holy Jesus. But then you also go, oh, look at the Chicago White Sox. They were like 0 and a bajillion, right? Like they were a terrible team. And he was trying to carve himself out in a role, and admittedly it wasn't the right fit. But I think for someone who's not going to command a ton of financial space, who is someone who you could put in the bullpen, which they do need, right? Like Ryan Yarborough's gone. He was the guy. Whether or not they put Rodriguez back there, like that remains to be seen, right? There's so many moves left. He's a guy that you can, Canadian connection, so people are always happy about that. But at the same time, he's got the stuff to be an effective reliever and in a pinch a starter, right? So I think he's impressive. And the other guy, I think if the Blue Jays or even just intriguing out there is Abraham Toro. He's going to get a minor league deal. Like that's a given. I don't think he's going to get a major league deal. He's going to get that minor league deal with invite, but he was so good for the Athletics out of the gate. Like he was so strong, and then he just plateaued. Like almost like it ran out of gas. Like he just dropped, right. And I think over the past few seasons, he's bounced around. And once he gains a little bit of that stability, I think it's kind of like Addison Barger, right? Like last season, he got the cup of coffee. He went like 0 for 19, got the one hit, and then he went back down. And then he came back up and he got a little bit better, and then he went back down. And then he came back up, stayed for the rest of the season, and he was turning on balls towards the end of the year. Like he had that walk off, like he just demolished it, right? Like he started to figure it out. And I think Toro's in that same boat. But with him, you get that versatility. He can play a couple different positions in the infield. So is he the flashiest name in the market? No, absolutely not. But at the same time, he's a guy that I think if he can get the right minor league deal with an organization, he probably starts the year in the minors, but he'll figure it out, and the team's going to be like, "Yep, we've got to bring him to the level and give him a little bit of runway, and he'll go." Right. So we've seen him excel on the Brewers when he was there at times. We've seen him do well with the Athletics, and just needs to find, kind of like Otto Lopez. He found Miami and really put together a solid campaign, and small market team probably do well with him. Maybe the Blue Jays want some more infield depth because they like collecting them like Pokemon cards. So
Got to get them all. Got to get them
yeah, pretty
all.
much.
Um, all right. One more on the Canadian angle for you. I mean, a
Sure.
pretty exciting year for Canadian prospects. Owen Casey, Tyler Black, Matt Wilkinson, Jonah Tong, some guys who just, really had pop-up years and kind of positioned themselves really well for the future. Who are you most excited for in 2025 that, either just made their MLB debut or hasn't quite reached the majors yet?
Matt Tugboat Wilkinson,
Love it.
because
Got to be
Love
the
it.
answer.
that guy,
Good answer.
that guy absolutely shoved this year. Like he was what JUCO pitcher of the year. They snagged him in the 10th round. He started this year and just went, woo, like he's just a strikeout machine. That guy, he's phenomenal, right? And he's like I said, nickname's Tugboat. He's a big dude, and he just goes out there and he shoves, right? And you see all these guys go out, and his K per nine was just incredible. Like it was up there. I don't have it in front of me, but it was leading all minor league pitchers at one point, and that's top. That's beating top prospects. That's beating everyone across the board, and I think he's a guy that really can show what he can do if given runway this year, right? Like double A is definitely in the cards for him. I think he makes it to triple A at the end of the year. He's a guy that I think could easily bull run himself to the major leagues towards the end of the season, right? He's a strikeout guy. Like he's that's his calling card. He's so impressive that way. And I think he's out of the pitching side at least. If I had to pick a hitter, it's Owen Casey. That guy, I'm shocked he didn't get at least a cup of coffee at the end of the year with the Cubs there, right? You knew he was going to get protected. You knew he was, he's got his name in trade chatter this year, right out of the offseason. I wouldn't be surprised if the Cubs entertain that because they're stuck with Cody Bellinger now. Because that didn't turn out so well. They got a couple of, that outfield's a little bit stacked, not stacked, that's not the right word, but a little bit dense, right? They got a couple guys that you want to kind of play every day, but Owen Casey's gonna, yeah, I saw him play against the Buffalo Bisons, and the guy's just a man playing against boys. He's taking pitches, he's got the speed, he's got everything that you look for, and it's time. Bring him up.
Love a good tugboat reference. If only for the nickname, he needs to make it just on that alone. I'd say. I'm gonna go a little bit out of left field here. Just a final question for me. We've got you here. We may as well
Sure.
ask about a Juan Soto take, just in terms of if he were to become a Blue Jay, where you'd put the kind of the radar on that. Anything you've really got to say about and all this Juan Soto to Blue Jays drama being stirred up over the last few weeks.
Yeah, I mean, it pulls on you a little bit because fans know what can happen, right? In terms of good and bad, right? Like we saw the Shohei Ohtani sweepstakes not go the way that we want. We saw the Blue Jays get used in a way that wasn't ideal, right? Whether that's beat writers making wrong things, acquisitions or whatever, and fans getting attached to it, right? Like the whole plane gate thing, like it's frustrating, right? And but what I think is positive out of all of this, right? Because you can hate on Atkins and Shapiro all you want. There's legitimate reasons for, there's legitimate reasons against. But one thing that they have done well as of late is create a culture within the Blue Jays organization that entices players to sign there, right? We saw it with Ryu, we saw it with Springer, we saw it with Gosman, Bassett. Like these guys, yeah, I don't know if you've ever been to the Blue Jays facility, but they have like whole areas, or the Blue Jays, the Rogers Center, the like downstairs, they have whole areas dedicated to families, to all these different things, like amenities. Like the stories on how they signed Springer, like they're phenomenal. Like they go top tier, they go all out. Toronto's a really great city for all these different backgrounds. Ethnicity is very diverse, right? A lot of people respect Toronto and put it high on their list when they come here. And I think at the end of the day, I think one of the positives that come out of chasing someone like Ohtani is it proves that you can hang out in the deep end. And whether or not you want to believe that Ohtani was considering the Blue Jays, like he met with them still. He talked with them. Like that's you don't go like he didn't talk with Oakland. right? Like he didn't talk with Cleveland. He didn't talk with these teams because it's not worth his time. They weren't going to pursue him. And it proved that the Blue Jays were willing to hang out in the deep end. And for an organization that's one of the only ones that's owned by a corporation, like that speaks volumes because they can go that route if they want. Like Rogers could spend 300 to 400 million if they wanted to. But it's a business, right? It's a business at the end of the day. There's taxes, there's all these things, and they need to get a return, right? It's the name of the game. But the positive side of that is that after the renovations, after the player development complex, all these different things off the field, they're proving that they are making Toronto a place to that players want to go to. Now, the opposite side of that is that if you're someone like Juan Soto, you're going to look at the whole organization, right? You're going to look at their farm system. Blue Jays farm system isn't that great, right? You're going to look at recent results. Not too much to scream about, but the pieces are there. If you're someone like Juan Soto and you want to be a hero to a country, Toronto's the place to go. But he's also got a taste in New York. You're a hero in New York, that's pretty big too, right? So I think in terms of everything, as someone watching this all unfold, you just go in with optimism, but you go in knowing that there's skepticism to go that we've been here before. The Blue Jays, in theory, got kind of used. And is it going to happen again? And so you don't want to get your hopes up too high. But at the same time, there is validity that the Blue Jays are a player in this. There's validity that the Blue Jays could sign him. And to sign someone like Soto would be a huge thing for this organization. Um, just the talent alone, the personality, it speaks to other free agents to go, hey, we're committed to winning here, which speaks volumes, right? Same with if they sign Guerrero Jr. to an extension, right? Like that speaks volumes, right? And that speaks a lot. But at the end of the day, you need to get it done. And if you don't, then you got to pivot accordingly. And for a front office that is on the hot seat, they need to figure it out whether that's Juan Soto or not. But I guess it's just exciting, right? It's exciting to be a part of it, to not be on the sidelines. And now we're kind of entering that phase of like just pick someone. Love of God, pick someone so everything else can just keep going, right? So it's exciting, but you err on the side of caution.
Guarded optimism is the theme of the offseason, I think.
A little bit.
All right. Well, Tyson, thank you so much for doing this. Great stuff. Really appreciate you taking the time. Always great to catch up and keep up all the great work, man.
Appreciate it.
All right. That is Tyson Shushkewich, a writer at Jays Nation and Canadian Baseball Network. You can find him on Twitter at Tyson_MLB. Are you on Blue Sky yet, Tyson? You made the move at all?
I think so. I think I did it, but I haven't done anything with it. So if you want to be the first person following me, go for it. It's the same.
All right, everybody, go find Tyson on Blue Sky if you're there. Very, very exciting times in the social media world. But yeah, make sure to hit the subscribe and like buttons if you're watching on YouTube. You can find us there at the Bird's Eye View Podcast. If you're listening along on the podcast provider of your choice, make sure to drop a follow and review. Along with Tyson, you can find us on Twitter. I'm at Worden_Zach. Jori is at Jori Negin-Shecter, and the pod is at BEB_pod. Thank you very much for listening.